After the egg, life starts, tribes form and history is created. Humans. Since the dawn of mankind, a mystery of mysteries has been lurking in the mind. Humans have been asking, are we rootless? Where we all came from? Where do our roots lead us? Surely all lines converge somewhere. What's our history? Question after question arise among humans' eternal restless mind and soul, seeking his, hers, ours, theirs, origin. As an ancient philosopher once said, the more you know you don't know. Then the other philosopher said, know thyself. So which is it then? Well, I'm gonna try my best, and go with the second one. So how we got to this point where we are today? Maybe, like this. Sort of, but it's not going to be what you think. I assure you. I will share my perspective on the matter, solely based on objective factual evidence, which is everywhere you look, and not in a biased subjective way, because that doesn't help anyone, does it? The only problem was that one must know many languages, in order to gather and understand history, mythology, customs and traditions. One starts piecing it all together, piece by piece like a giant jigsaw puzzle. Then you start seeing the overall picture history tells us. The key is knowing which piece fits where, and not force it in, at all. There is no need for that. So as it is said in mythology, everything had a single common origin. That's true. You have heard that God made it so that they no longer spoke the same languages, which is not true at all. The language is still the same, only you need the key to decipher it all, meaning the oldest language that survived unchanged or had minimal changes to it from when it all started. That language exists still today. But for the time being, I won't say which one it is. I will go into detail when I get to the linguistical parts of the videos. Right now I'm gonna focus on presenting the broader picture of the events of European people's history and heritage that lead from common origin into multiple shattered single pieces of origins unknown, formation of different tribes, nations all over Europe, their common ancient links in history from the past, endless wars, reasons why the wars started, who fought against who. My main focus is European peoples, tribes, nations' origins, even though at times you can't escape going a little further, but we follow where the story and facts lead us, and it leads there naturally. First, human origin. The name Pelasgian doesn't say much to 90% of the common folks, even though I must say there has been many famous world-renowned historians and writers of the 17th and 18th century, who have gone into lengthy details explaining who the Pelasgian were, emphasizing their utmost high importance in history. Back then there was no internet, so information was what you could get your hands on, so it was quite an achievement on their part figuring out as much as they did. Even the old famous ancient philosophers and writers, like Homer and Herodotus and many others, said the same things verbatim, about the same people, meaning the Pelasgians as the primary source for European. Which is true and accurate, since all the archaeological, mythological, anthropological, topological, linguistical support those trees of European tribes and nations are of Pelasgian origin or descendants of them. One thing is for sure, and that is, that they didn't vanish into thin air overnight, but actually it's quite their opposite. Parts of them stayed where they have always been, guarding those mountain paths and gorges. Furthermore, all the great empires of the past in that region were all bonded by blood ties, coming from the same source as one, and history is quite persistent in this matter, that all of them are linked together in quite an astonishing chronological order. There is no escaping those facts, I'm afraid. As I briefly described in the first part about the universal X symbol, that nature created, because as said in the previous video, nature always has created and is still creating, and it will always create everything. All the so-called ancient gods had a striking similarity of wearing the same hat or cap as a half-shell of a broken egg, which is called Peleus or Peleus. That was a way of symbolizing a common noticeable origin of them all, from whom they all stemmed. since it was deemed very important to them, seeing as they were constantly depicted in various statues and paintings that survived, wearing the same bilious blizzard cap, hat, in the whole region of antiquity, throughout the ages. Being that the first tribes started to evolve, and discover the way of life, in nature, just as a newborn baby does. They quickly found shelter firstly in the caves and started to paint what they saw in nature and draw it in the cave walls and rocks. That started the pictorial language and various symbols of animals, which they later came to worship not as deities or gods, but probably as very good in their skills and strength. In a way they were trying to find out which one of them is the most superior animal, so that they can assimilate or wear that symbol as theirs, which also did happen since they assimilated themselves with many animal symbols until they eventually found out that one animal is, above all, and it's the most superior of them all. More on symbolism on later videos. Pelasgian tribes started to grow in numbers, and they started to occupy the surrounding empty areas around them, thus creating many important famous dynasties or empires with many great cities around the center point where it all started. By the passing of time eventually, they started to venture and explore free empty lands mainly in the north, but also south and east as well. They settled and started new colonies all over Europe then, simply called northern lands. At this time all of Pelasgia was homogeneous and had one language, and were one distinct race of people. Since the development of the oldest places of origin was further along in development, there was great cities or regions of wealth and population. The most famous one was Troy, and other surrounding great cities and regions around the center point of origin. That was in there, Near East. Other settlements were in Middle East and North African. I mean, it should be pretty obvious. The name tells it all, Near East. And far south, near and far from what? I might add. Center point perhaps? It's quite simple and straightforward, really. Let's get back on the subject. Sometime before the fall of Troy, while the Pelasgians were exploring far south and far east, they met different races of people, which were Chinese, from far east, and Africans from far south, who spoke different languages, and looked also physically different. Little did the Pelasgians know then, that those unfamiliar different people from the south and east will eventually be their new worst enemies, who will attack, kill and destroy and lead to terrible destruction, misfortune for the Pelasgians. Since Pelasgian settlements were so wide apart in different parts of mainland Europe, the outer rim settlements in Near East, Middle East and North Africa will be the first ones to fall and be destroyed. So, that's how the downfall of Pelasgian territories started, slowly piece by piece. Later on southern and eastern invaders turned on each other, dominating each other, and finally merging and intermingling and creating combined races, having also thousands of war prisoners made their numbers rise at an alarming rate, which made the Pelasgian big cities fall even faster. The most rapid growth of numbers had the most ruthless of them all, the descendants of the Asian and African tribes union that were called the Persians in the south and Seljuk Mongol tribes in the east. During hundreds and thousands of years, Pelasgian Empire big centers of wealth were conquered and destroyed one by enemies with vast numbers, forcing the many Pelasgian tribal nations and empires to retreat when they could, into inner mainland Europe. The attacks came from two fronts, that's the southern and eastern front, and Pelasgian, Illyrian withdrew until they found strategical points between narrow mountain paths and gorges where they could hold their ground or last stand, and doing that they were able to repel the invading armies off. The dominant important cities and empires that fell during the ages were Trojan dynasties, the Hittite dynasties, the Phrygian dynasties, the Sumerian dynasties, the Mesopotamian dynasties, the Babylonian, and northern African regions, pre-Egyptian dynasties. The survivors of the fall of Troy and other dynasties went on moving and settling among other Pelasgian tribes in Europe like Italy, Etruscan, like Spain, Basques, like UK, Celtics, and Northmen, Vikings, Nordmen, Friesland with Phrygian, hence all of them carry the same mythology and almost same identical symbols. After succeeding to hold their ground, stopping the enemy from advancing further into mainland Europe, the Pelasgian Illyrian tribes in southeast Europe literally stood guard in the forefront, keeping Europe Pelasgia safe. Then among the Pelasgian Illyrian came the man who would change the tide and avenged all that loss and tragedy, and that man was Alexander the Great. Recalling what happened in the past, Alexander the Great's only possible motive was revenge and reclaiming lost territories in the past, and that's precisely what he did. He conquered all the same territories of the Pelasgian which were lost during such a long time of countless invasions. Also he made sure to totally destroy his most ferocious enemies, that was the Persians, and chased them all the way to their home origin in India. As Alexander the Great hoped to find more survived Pelasgians who were left behind or captured, he found out that they were but a mere shadow and were heavily mixed with invaders by force or sold as slaves, so he decided to only rule over them as part of his empire. End of part 2. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video or found it interesting, please like, share, and subscribe for more videos to come.